Hi, back again with the review of another FriendlyARM board this week. This time we're taking a look at the NanoPi2. Is it really a NanoPi? All this talk about Pi is making me hungry. Ooh! NanoPi! Yum! Yum! The NanoPi2 is made by a company called FriendlyARM. This SBC has been around for a while now, but it'd be good to see how it stacks up against other SBCs. The NanoPi comes in several flavours. You can get them all from the FriendlyARM website for around... Hey, what? They've taken off the NanoPi2, and they only have the NanoPi2 Fire? What's going on? Okay, so the NanoPi2 and NanoPi2 Fire are essentially the same, with the only differences being an extra SD slot, no gigabit Ethernet, and with a BLE and Wi-Fi module instead. The NanoPi2 is bigger than the chip, a little smaller than the Raspberry Pi, and almost half the size of the NanoPi2. So what features does the NanoPi2 have? Starting from the top left and working clockwise. HDMI 1.4, USB 2.0, reset button, TTL UART for console, RGB LCD header, LED indicators for Wi-Fi and BLE, and also power, user programmable button, wireless antenna connector, onboard antenna, DVP camera interface, micro USB power, and a Raspberry Pi compliant header, sort of. The board runs a Samsung S5P4418 at 1.4 GHz, and it's loaded with 1GB DDR3 RAM. On the backside, this SBC is unique in that it has two SD slots, one for booting, whilst the other, well, just because. I also ordered a 3D printed case for the NanoPi2, which is, well, everything you can expect from a 3D printed case. However, it does give you clear access to all the ports without issue. Be careful when you screw it up, because you're just screwing metal into soft plastic. Over tighten and they'll just pop out. Whilst on the topic of cases, during my testing I was trying out various Pi hats and discovered that the slot they put in for the GPIO header was just too small. So the only solution was to remove the cover. Pi hats fit well, but due to the size of the smaller NanoPi2, it might be a bit awkward. Now moving on to support, this is something that FriendlyARM isn't quite so good at. Let me show you what I mean. There are 4 different websites dedicated to the NanoPi2. The friendlyarm.com, then there's friendlyarm.net, nanopi.org, which I just noticed is actually run by a different company. Then there's also NanoPi.io. So when you get your shiny new SBC, where can you download the SD image? This is where it gets confusing. Clicking on the download link gets you to some technical documents. Great, useful. Okay, let's try friendlyarm.net. Hey, downloads link. Excellent. Okay, maybe not. Okay, what about the products link? Oh, they have a NanoPi2 product page link. Okay, this will have it. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, it tells you how to compile your kernel. Not really what I want. Okay. Let's try nanopi.org. No downloads link, but they do have a product page link which is hashed out. And yes, a downloads link. Nope. But, there's a quick start page and a downloads link, which goes absolutely nowhere. That whole downloads page is useless. Surely nanopi.io has it? They have a downloads link? Okay, let's go back to friendlyarm.com. I saw a wiki page there. Okay, looking better. There we go, a NanoPi2 wiki page. Making progress. Get started looks good. Blah, 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 blah. And yes, there's a download link. Excellent. Now let's pause here. The NanoPi2 supports both Android and Linux-based OS, and several different distributions from those, like Kali, Deepin 15, Ubuntu, and if we drop into the mislabeled Windows folder, we can download Android, KitKat, and also Debian Linux. It seems that FriendlyARM took my advice from my NanoPC review and fixed up their main website, but all the other websites just make everything confusing. Anyway, just grab the OS of your choice. I started off with Linux first, and burn it to at least a 4GB SD card, chuck it into the N slot, add keyboard and mouse, and HDMI, and finally the juice. Once powered on, you should be greeted with a Linux desktop in around 40 seconds. The first order of business is to connect to your Wi-Fi access point, which is trivial enough using the WPA GUI tool. Once set, it will reconnect when you reboot next time. Since people will want to use it as a desktop, I first did some basic tests. Web browsing was a less than pleasant experience, mainly due to the fact that this is an ARM7 based SBC and there will be less software around for it. So I updated my Debian sources list to pull down Chromium and see how that went. It worked better than the stock Iceweasel browser, but an ARM7 based SBC still lacks a lot of software support. What about video? Oh, good grief, it's hopeless. Taking into account you only have 1GB RAM and an ARM7 MCU, it's pretty clear that you can't really use it as a desktop. So, what about the second SD card slot? I chucked in a 2GB SD card and it was discovered and the OS was able to mount it up without issue. So, this is the ultimate question. How does it go as a makerboard? First, a simple LED test, which works as expected. Now, while we're looking at the raw GPIO access, I have to point out the differences between the NanoPi2 and Raspberry Pi GPIO. The Raspberry Pi GPIO pins all come from one chip, whereas the NanoPi2 GPIOs come from a variety of chips. The NanoPi2 has 6 GPIO chips, but only 20 GPIO header pins. Each chip is mapped into GPIO space. For example, GPIO A starts at 1 all the way up to 31, GPIO B from 32 onwards, and so forth. I wrote a quick Perl script to highlight the GPIO pin mappings. This will work on any SBC that runs Linux. Download links are below and on my website. Next on to SPI tests. The handy dandy MAX 7219 multiplexer for this. Yep, it works as expected. Next, I2C tests using an MCP9808 temperature sensor. And yes, that works as expected, no issues at all. But one of the strange things is that I2C Detect seemed to not actually pick up the sensor on any of the I2C buses. It also caused the NanoPi2 to lock up the OS during scanning. Very strange. Apart from that, everything worked as expected, except for the odd hang on shutdown problem that happened in 1 out of every 4 reboots. So next on to Android testing. I loaded up the image, plugged it in, turned it on, and waited. And waited. And waited. And waited. I was just about to turn it off when... there we go. Okay, that took a while. The Android OS was really quite sluggish, but everything is there. FriendlyARM have also provided an application called iTest, which allows you to test out the GPIO pins from Android. Nice. Connecting to Wi-Fi was trivial, and once up, started installing several benchmarking tools, Antutu, GFX Bench, Geekbench, and 3D Mark. Antutu performance was to be expected. Hopeless. However, I didn't expect there to be retro acoustic modem sounds coming from their HDMI audio. Brings back memories. Reminds me of the time I used to pretend to be a modem and make letters appear on the screen. Anyway, results. Look, it's terrible. Moving on. Geekbench had the same expectations as well and spat out an expected result, which is right down the end of a very long list. GPU results were the same, right down the bottom. Do we need to keep going with this? Oh, why not? 3D Mark was stuttery, but went quite well considering. Some tests were averaging 2 frames per second, whilst others up to 20 frames per second, giving a final result of 2084. Just a little better than the Pine 64. Next, GFX Bench was very stuttery, which really showed up in the T-Rex demo. Results? A predictable low score of 7.3 frames per second. Certainly a lot better than the Pine 64 at 3.9 frames per second, and similar to a QB Board 5 or an Odroid X2. YouTube didn't have an issue, but if you look closely you'll see that the resolution has been dropped dramatically to keep the video smooth. 360 video was abysmal. Forget it, it's far too jerky. There are a number of issues with the NanoPi2 that I've listed here. The lack of injection molded case is a real problem, and there's only one option, which is a 3D printed one. Support is questionable, and it seems to have dropped the NanoPi2 product. Who knows how much longer that's going to be around for. Linux is overall stable, but don't think of it as a desktop. It's not. Graphics is hopeless, but you get what you pay for. The Raspberry Pi compatible GPIO header is nice, but it's not fully compatible in software. You also only have a DVP camera interface, which is very different to the standard MIPI CSI interface. So what do I think of the NanoPi2? Well, frankly, the only advantage it has over the Pi 3 is the second SD card slot, additional serial ports, and a slightly smaller footprint. There are only a few issues with it, but everything works as advertised. So I'd give this a score of 4.0 out of 5. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you got something out of it. If you enjoyed it, then don't forget to like. And it'd be great to see you as a subscriber. So, see you next week.